We call the City Council Elections Commission meeting to order. Please call the roll.
Mayor Clark.
Here.
Commissioner Felder.
Here.
Germaini.
Here.
Echoangeli. Here. Lamore.
Yeah, excused.
Vining. Here. Whitman.
Here.
So we have a few items as we normally do to proceed through those. We have the some action, so I'll turn it over to Clerk Treasurer Lavoy.
All right. The first item that we need to discuss is under, looks like there was a typo, but it's under Commission Action, Resolution Delegating Certain Duties to the Clerk Treasurer. And this is for the May 7th Jefferson School election, which encompasses about 50 registered voters in Precinct 3 North. So we need a motion to accept the resolution delegating duties to me as clerk to prepare the ballots and the election containers, et cetera, as we normally do.
Your Honor.
Yes.
Motion to delegate certain duties to the clerk treasurer for the upcoming election.
Support. Okay, motion by Commissioner Felder, supported by Commissioner Echoangeli. Clerk, I know there's some items that require roll call, some that can be done.
Let's do this one by roll call.
Okay. Please call roll.
Okay, Mayor Clark,
Yes.
Commissioner Felder,
Yes.
Germaini,
Yes.
Echoangeli,
Yes.
Vining,
Yes.
Whitman.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The next item is the approval of election inspectors, and you have a list. It's the yellow sheet of paper. And right now, we're going to make a motion. We can actually do it together at the same time. We need to approve the election inspector list that we have and the receiving board list.
Very well.
Your Honor.
Yes, Commissioner Felder.
I motion that we approve the election inspectors and the delegate, the receiving board members
Support.
as submitted.
Motion by Commissioner Felder, supported by Commissioner Echoangeli to, as stated.
I'll do another roll call for
Yes,
this.
please call roll.
Mayor Clark,
Yes.
Commissioner Felder,
Yes.
Germaini,
Yes.
Echoangeli,
Yes.
Vining,
Yes.
Whitman.
Yes.
All right, the last item is the establishment of the public accuracy test. And just to refresh all of you, that's the meeting where we need a quorum. Members need to volunteer. And I know I usually say this, but this one literally will be less than 30 minutes. So if everyone shows up, we'll get started on time. We're proposing 10 a.m. on Tuesday, April 30th.
I can be here.
You said you could be here?
Yes.
Okay.
I can be here, Your Honor.
Okay, very good. Meeting on the third floor that day, so. We'll see if any, okay, and then we'll see if, I'll check with,
Mayor.
oh, yes.
Paul
Yeah,
said
Paul,
she could.
so you could. So I'll see if Councilman Lamore would be available. If not,
Okay.
I'll try to make some adjustments on my meeting on the 30th to
Okay.
be there. So I think we can make it.
All right.
Do you need a motion for the people?
I do. I need a motion to establish Tuesday, April 30th at 10 a.m. With the election commission members that volunteered to participate.
I'm sorry, you said 10 a.m., correct?
Correct.
Okay, I can make that. So, so what I hear is Councilwoman Germaini, Councilwoman Vining, Whitman, and Clark can be in attendance.
Yes.
Okay, so those are the four. We just need a motion to accept that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Your Honor,
Yes,
I
Councilwoman.
make a motion that we accept the public accuracy testing dates and participants for
Support.
Tuesday, April 30th at 10 a.m.
Okay. So motion by Councilwoman or Commissioner Vining, supported by Commissioner Germaini, as stated. Please call the roll.
Mayor Clark?
Yes.
Commissioner Felder?
Yes.
Germaini?
Yes.
Echoangeli?
Yes.
Vining?
Yes.
Whitman?
Yes.
All right. Are there any commission comments?
Commissioner comments? Seeing none.
Any citizen comments?
So this, the election commission meeting, as stated by the clerk treasurer Lavoy, was regarding the May 7th Jefferson School election, which we have residents that do participate in that. So if there's any comments from those present here this evening. No comments? Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn the election commission meeting.
Motion by Commissioner Felder, supported by Councilwoman Whitman.
We can do all in favor.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Very good.
Thank
We're
you.
adjourned with that. So I'm just going to continue on and thank you. Next item we have is the, we'll call the City Council work session meeting to order. Clerk, please call the roll.
All right, 1 second.
Yeah, I know.
I have to
I'm
switch
moving
over.
along. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Councilperson Germaini,
Here.
Lamore, Felder,
Here?
Whitman. Here. Equangeli.
Here.
Vining.
Here.
Mayor Clark.
Here. So we have a couple items on the work session. Let me, as time permits, other discussions. So, Mr. Pastu.
Thank you, Your Honor. First item would like to talk about is the city's collaboration with MDOT regarding the freeway interchanges. And in particular, as part of the origin of this was the Monroe Link program and some of the recommendations that came from that. We've done a couple of studies regarding the Front Street interchange with our consultants, OHM Advisors, and many stakeholders in that immediate area. One of the other pieces that is important is a 2013 MDOT study regarding the work that they would need to look at with those two freeway interchanges at Front and Elm. And then I'm going to share with you some preliminary discussions with MDOT. There's been positive here to this point, and I think going forward, wanted to provide council with an update, but also a very specific ask at the end of all of this. So, one of the things I think I'd like to kind of do is you see the specific requested improvements. We're going to kind of find our way through that. Mark's going to fill in the gaps as I talk and expand upon items as we go along. So I think I'd like to go through the specific requested improvements that we've come up with. Is first eliminate MDOT's capital and ongoing maintenance of East Elm interchange. In part, we know it's a very dangerous and very costly interchange for MDOT. What you're looking at here is some of the alignment alternatives when you look at both Elm and Front Street. Particularly, you'll see the X'd out area where that freeway ramp would be on Elm. And then looking at a couple of alignments, I know that certainly that the Shun Lee property, and I can talk about that a little bit later on in the regular meeting, but look at making some changes in there. We know from the study of 2013 that the Elm Avenue improvement area would probably cost MDOT somewhere in the neighborhood of about $10 million. And even with that, we know that I'm getting the look that I need to turn my mic on. Sorry about that. We know that it's going to cost MDOT roughly $10 million. We also going to require many waivers from the Federal Highway Administration regarding some of the difficult challenges that they have associated with that, most notably the environmental issues with that. And so regardless, they can put a lot of money into it, and it's still going to be a very substandard interchange. So that's part of the first one. But what we'd like to do is, if we can find a solution to have them reinvest a portion of savings into the city's road network to make that change possible. And we'll walk through that in a little bit moment. But also reconstruct the Front Street ramps, again, looking to improve the multimodal logistic opportunities with the port, the railroads in that immediate area, improve access to the River Raisin National Battlefield Park, and then also function as a gateway into our downtown. The other part of it is a number of improvements up on North Dixie and the Industrial Park as part of a consideration of that, and then lastly, some pedestrian improvements. So I think if we kind of walk through some of these slides here, let's go with the one that is going to be probably the most notable, and Mark's got it pulled up on the screen. This is the area up on North Dixie, and it is a real nothing short of a mess up there, given the type of truck traffic that you have, as well as regular vehicle traffic coming out that, many curb cuts. And so one of the things that we were looking at doing with this, and again, this is part of the network improvement within the city to consider an Elm Avenue closing, is you look at the top area north of North Dixie there, and you'll see kind of rerouting a lot of that truck traffic from where it is currently with that TA truck stop off of Turnus. There's a signal there at Turnus, and move it further west so that we can get all of our truck traffic aligned with Detroit Avenue. That's a significant item when we talk about the industrial park. But you can see how that flow would pull all of that off. Obviously, you'd need a signal at that intersection. And then there's some areas that are identified as potential curb cut closures along North Dixie as well. Certainly look at removing the signal at Turnus, and because at that point in time, there will no longer be any truck traffic, just mostly regular vehicle. And then the other part of it is that you can see there at the bottom where Mark's got the arrow is to cut off the through access from the industrial park. The one business in there that we would have to work with a little bit, but they would just end up going down to Rose to connect to the Detroit Avenue. But the intent is to funnel all of the truck traffic to Detroit Avenue. And so that's a pretty important element of it. And Detroit Avenue will ultimately be the means by which truck traffic, or any traffic, if you will get to the Elm Avenue area. So we go on to the next one. This is the industrial park. And as many of you know that have been in there, its condition is terrible. Very, very poor. Mr. Lewis has done some estimates. We're looking at on the order of about $2 million. And I'll be honest with you, part of this discussion with MDOT is, along with cleaning up some of the traffic flow, one of the conditions that we would expect is you help us with our internal network, this in particular. So somewhere down the road, I'll talk about reimbursement, future reimbursements of expenses. But clearly, we're going at this with an expectation that they're going to have to participate in providing funding for us to help make this feasible, where not only do we make the internal improvements to existing streets that are in poor condition, but also making sure that they can get to Detroit Avenue as well. Next. And then part of it also is to, oops, yep, I think Mark's going to blow it up a little bit there, yep. And as you can see, with the one arrow there up in the top left is the proposed Detroit Avenue relocation. Consistent with what's contained in the Heritage Corridor plan is to move it in that direction. It would close off the rest of that Detroit Avenue street, but that is how truck traffic or any vehicle traffic headed to East Elm, east of the freeway, would get there, is utilizing that. And so we think it's a pretty reasonable approach. It saves them a boatload of money. Our estimates are somewhere in the neighborhood of about $5 million, and the approach with them is, look, if we save you 10, give us half and let us do this, and we will be eliminating for them a really poor freeway interchange at Elm. We have a plan to get that traffic to that destination. We clean up a lot of the problems up on North Dixie as well, and also comply with our plan related to the relocation of Detroit Avenue with the Heritage Corridor. On top of that, we start looking at the other improvements with on Front Street. Going back to that, it starts introducing the gateway feature that is part of the Monroe Link plan. So having said that, kind of gives you kind of a broad view of it. MDOT is receptive to it, obviously. We save them substantial money, but also take care of a couple of problems that they have with their freeway interchanges. The discussion, as you go down to kind of like the third item, Monroe commitment to MDOT, is they would like us to administer the planning and environmental leakage process. This is part of what would be required for any improvement that they would have to make along I-75 and also any of the interchanges. The fact that we've been proactive in working with a lot of the stakeholders is a positive development from their end of it. They would prefer locally for us to carry the ball. And then the other part, the second part, and it goes probably on the back end, is to do an access change request where essentially they're evaluating traffic counts and circulation and doing some of the traffic modeling that would go with part of the process. The Port of Monroe is expressed, will dedicate property for the freeway interchanges on front. And then all of this as a condition is if we would support as a city the closing of East Elm if they're willing to go through all of these process. So having said that, I'll let Mark talk a little bit about where we need to get something to MDOT, and I cannot remember what the process is. Hopefully you'll remember what their planning group is.
Yep, so as Vince mentioned, we've been in discussions with MDOT. We've gone up to the Brighton Center a couple times and presented to them the proposal and the idea. They're very appreciative of the work that we've done so far to engage the stakeholders. The next thing that we need to do is to engage even more stakeholders. So talking about the folks who are down on Detroit Avenue, open it up to the entire community, get their feedback on some different alternatives, more than just what's proposed here, but and then carry through with that process. They prefer that being done at the local because we've got the relationships, we know our community better than they do, and so to present these options at the feet on the streets, so to speak, rather than the out-of-town experts. And so throughout these discussions with MDOT, I think we're aware they have a plan to start reconstructing I-75 starting at the state line this year, and then eventually moving up and then saving the city for last. So they're doing the state line to Erie Road, then Erie Road to South Otter Creek the following year, South Otter Creek to La Pleasance the following year, and then finally coming to the city of Monroe to do the interchanges and reconstructing 75 through the city. And so through the discussions, they've actually indicated that they would consider moving the city's portion up ahead of schedule, which is very favorable. When we talk about the Gordie Howe Bridge coming, having a lot of this major significant road work that includes more than just repaving or replacing the concrete on 75, but include the interchanges, especially to the port tenants, is important to do that well before the Gordie Howe is finished. So we appreciate their cooperation and their consideration to move it up. But they do have what's called a proposed project review board, where the senior leadership at MDOT listens to all the different engineers and staff from across the state for the proposed projects, and then senior staff and administration gives their sign off and to proceed ahead. And so I believe that they meet April 16th. It's either April 15th or 16th. And so we've provided them with a lot of information. They're prepared to present this project to the review board in Lansing, including moving it up ahead of schedule and moving ahead with the Pell process and looking at reallocating some of the funds, including some of the local road network repairs. And so we've sent all the work that the city has done on this so far is going to weigh very heavy in our favor. That we've done the engagement, we've did the study with OHM advisors in the past. The fact that the port would be willing to consider donating some of the property, the public engagement we've done, and then also the consideration that we may undertake the Pell process and the interchange access with federal highways. And so with that deadline coming up, we've been able to provide them with hopefully a lot of the front-end information, but we do have to send a letter specifically with what all of our requests are for that period. And I know Vince has drafted that letter, and after we receive your feedback tonight, be prepared to send that off tomorrow so that MDOT knows exactly what we're asking for when they meet next month, or this month.
Okay. Vince, anything further, or?
And so I think the last thing to follow up on that, if you look down there, is city's request from MDOT You have the specifics, future reimbursement of the Pell process, $350,000, as well as the access change request, $50,000. So, Mark and I had talked with Ed about, pulling the funds for that, but with the understanding nothing happens without a reimbursement. Nothing happens without MDOT giving a blessing to the scope of work. We've been with OHM advisors starting through the LINK program and the study. Our recommendation would be to continue with OHM advisors on this process since they've had also a lot of the contact with us each step of the way, in dealing with MDOT. And so what I'm asking is for your blessing to continue the dialogue related to this collaboration with MDOT.
I'll see if there's any council comments. I know that there's been a lot of discussion about this and opportunities with MDOT if they'll come on board. Councilman Michelangelo.
Degree of risk.
We don't move forward without a reimbursement agreement for the first phase of it. The only issue that I may have is, and again, it has to be conditioned as we go through that. And part of that planning environmental linkage is going to tell you what impacts will come as a result of it. But clearly, we're not, in the long run, going to be putting anything out. And our approval and recommendation for the closure of Elm would have to be conditioned upon a substantial appropriation or funding for our internal city network to get there. I don't want to be carrying their water for them and then have us walk away at the last moment. So there's got to be that understanding. That's the risk is on the back end of it, I think.
So the PEL process is going to look at this whole system. And what happens when you get through the PEL process if MDOT at the end of the process takes a look at it and says, it's a little bit more complicated than we want to be. We want to look at. It's a little bit more money than we want to spend. We're just going to go ahead and keep the interchange the way that it is and make some improvements to it. Are we at a point where we're still going to get reimbursed the money on the Pell process?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. That one I'm not worried about. I'm worried about the long term if we get reimbursed for the internal network costs. But definitely what would happen here is and let's just presume that everything is fine at the higher level of MDOT, you're going to have an agreement for being reimbursed for this. We'll incur the upfront costs, but we will get reimbursed at the conclusion of the process. So I'm not concerned that we're going to be out anything with that.
They have to do the Pell process regardless of whether they do the local road network improvements or not.
Good point.
So part of it, through the Pell process is they're going to be looking at La Pleasance Road. That's why the first map that I showed the entire project area. They're going to look, if we close the Elm Avenue interchange, what's the impact going to be on La Pleasance Road to the south and then Dixie Highway to the north. And we're going into this thinking that if you close Elm Avenue, it is going to impact Dixie Highway and justify the improvements to the north more so than the south. And OHM they felt the same way, so.
Vince?
If I could just add too, is that make no mistake, our consultant has said this is a big ask of the city, and my response to him was, yes, it is, but in the context of, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, but within the context of their bureaucratic framework by which they have to operate. Outside of that bureaucratic framework, this would be a win-win that I think just about every reasonable person would say, yeah, that makes sense. And in some cases, what you do is needing help in some persuasion. And when we talk about it, we're going to talk about a lobbyist after this one here, and how you can, and in many ways, break through that ice that somewhat limits them in that entrepreneurial aspect of what they can and can't do. So that's really, I think, part of it is this is far different than what they're used to dealing with, but I don't see how anyone cannot find a win-win for both of us in that regard. And more importantly, the safety that goes along with it, the economic enhancement associated with improving the front street. So I think it is, again, it's non-standard for them, but clearly we need to help them with, making this work.
Yeah, the initial reaction that we got from MDOT when we talked about closing Elm is they were thrilled with that, because most of the time when they want to close an interchange, the community really bucks the idea and does not support it. And so, given the fact that there's already community support and they realize that, that's something that we have in our pocket to be able to say we can deliver the community support for that, as long as you'll assist us with some of the local road networks. And so they're very open to the idea of removing the interchange and then improving Front Street at the same time. It's how far off the interchange they come in terms of making the improvements to reline Front Street and then some of the work to the north.
Other questions for city manager or for Mr. Cochran? Well,
You taking any?
I think if there may be some people here who have comments at the public meeting or public comment time at the council meeting, would be an opportunity to make that this for the work session to stay on task. So I guess as I look at this, you're looking, support, at least from council. I look at this and I think it's been said, but, we know what the condition of the current ramps are and how they're really non-functional at times. And there's those that purposely avoid them. So coming up with a variety of alternatives. This one kind of is elevated to the end where you're having a conversation with MDOT. I think the items that Mr. Pastu had said regarding the end part of this with MDOT and what our local needs are going to have to be able to finally agree. But the process of the Pell and moving forward, looking at reimbursement expenses, I think it's a good idea. We need to move forward now on it because we know that they're coming north as they go through the next 3 to 4 years and improving I-75. This will be, if it isn't now, it's going to be a decade later, if not more, or 2. So I think we should move forward, but I'll see what the council says.
That being the case, if assuming there's enough
No,
support to
objection.
continue it, I got this letter drafted that Mr. Cochran, Lewis, and I have been working on, and so we'll let you know how the response is with the higher ups at MDOT going forward. So,
Well, I'm assuming that part of the environmental process is going to be an evaluation of what the impact of the road configuration is going to be on like residential properties that are along Oak Street, residential properties that are along Detroit Avenue.
correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Very good. Unless there's objections or concerns. Thank you.
Is earlier this year we had talked about facilitation services regarding recreational marijuana. I've reached out to a couple of, actually more than a couple consultants, I think 3, and one was interested but didn't provide much response afterwards. The other indicated he wasn't able to do it, and actually referred me to this individual here. It is Cotton Woody and Associates. It's actually a former city manager, longtime city manager. Most recently, he retired from Holland. Teaches at Grand Valley State University with government and strategic planning. Has done a number of strategic planning and facilitation projects over his career. So he essentially provided 2 alternatives, and that was a function of what we talked about back in January with having what I would consider, if you flip to the second page, a more comprehensive policy support work option. I'll walk through some of the aspects of it. It's a 12 to 14-week process once it's initiated. One of the things he did indicate, and very similar with our discussion regarding the public safety assessment, it needs support of the council to be actively involved in the process. And also the other part is looking for a steering committee to move things along. So stage 1, where it says education, interesting where it has open houses. One of the things that he thought, and he actually priced it out, and it's included in the pricing at the end, is bringing in a few speakers to talk about experiences around the country. And he costed it out, and while there isn't been speakers selected yet, would do more research before finalizing, but did come up with a pricing that he thought was comfortable with that. Interestingly enough, looking at essentially 3 different charrettes, if you will, for example, like on a Friday, and I'll start each one with like an open house, stations, if you will think. You could have these individuals will be at different stations for people to meet and talk with them, kind of on a more of a face-to-face informal. Then the speakers will do their discussion items for the group and allow for debate. He puts debate in there, but it's a dialogue with you know, the individuals participating in the charrette, as well as questions and answers. You know, if and then kind of a consensus summary that may come out of that. I'll presume this is like on a Friday, if you will. And then the following morning would probably be everyone meeting again to go over that aspect of it as to what that consensus summary might be. But the first part is, you know, more of a discussion regarding the issue itself. The second part is finding its way into goal setting. That's usually going to happen 2 to 3 weeks later after the first one. Opportunity for people to digest the information, maybe do a little more research with that. The third part is developing strategies as a result of that. Stage 4 is an interesting one, probably not necessary, but one that he finds interesting as a professional facilitator is that sometimes you find yourself working into a think, you know, everyone's thinking the same. He said sometimes it's helpful to go back afterwards and challenge some of the assumptions that led to some of the strategies and whether it's worth it to rethink that or not. And the last part is just the final report. One of the things that is drives the cost is whether you need printing, and that's an option, and that drives down the pricing substantially for that. But part of the thought process is to, you know, have a very broad discussion about what the goals are. And I think that's probably the most important thing, you know, you can have. Not only what the goals are, but what you don't want. And how do you have a discussion regarding facilities involving industrial property on the east side, whether you want that to be associated with, you know, a distribution for marijuana, or would you prefer to have it for other logistical type of uses? What type of retail would you want? Where would you want it? What's the scale? I mean, I've used the term in the past, you know, having a superstore right on the edge of the freeway. And part of it is taking into consideration, you know, the immediate proximity that we have to Ohio, who doesn't have, you know, recreational marijuana. And so we know in Colorado that's been an issue with some of the border states or the border communities with that. And then you find your way into other related issues. And this is in part why I actually, you know, prefer maybe a city manager, because there are certain law enforcement aspects of it that go into consideration as to what you're citing, how it's going to be secured. And then certain mixed uses, like in the downtown, what happens? Do you allow a certain use in the main floor, and when you've got apartments above? A lot of things to be contemplated. And so, and interestingly enough, as the consultant in this case that provided the proposal indicated, just so you guys are very familiar with my thoughts, he said, in the interest of full disclosure, I actually voted for the referendum. So I said, good. You know, so it just doesn't, you know, this needs to be, if we're going to go this route, it has to be perceived as being fair and credible to all the parties associated with it. The other proposal, which is substantially less, is an expedited process, which essentially has stage 1 and obviously an abbreviated process as far as the final report, and then if there's any needed follow-up on it. And if you look down at the bottom of the page, you can see the difference in the cost. I think with the comprehensive, we could probably even, depending on the discussion here, knock down a couple of $1,000s on some of those. And then the expedited is somewhat bare bones, but it just a little bit under 10,000 with that. So I want to throw that out there. It's somebody I would be comfortable, proceeding with. I think it's gone. There's a lot of thought that went into preparing the proposal, and so be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have regarding that.
We'll start with questions or comments from council. No, I have one. I'll just start. So the company that's at least responded here, did they provide, maybe I just haven't looked far enough here yet, provided examples where they've done facilitations? Is that on the next page here, references?
In the back end, you will see some of those of the proposal, some of the work that have been done with
I can see where it says references, but so I'm assuming they've probably done some type of work with them, whether it's on this topic or another. And then general consulting, municipal management services. Consulting, I'm assuming they've worked with each of these in some fashion, but I'm just trying to, I guess as I think this through, where they may have done some work, and have we reached out to find out what those results were? And it's not so much the decision as much the process and getting to where they felt that they did have enough information to make a decision.
I have another sheet that has more information and background on this.
Okay, maybe I just didn't look far enough here.
No, it's not here. But I've got it on another
All right.
piece of information that he's provided. So,
Very well.
and interestingly enough, I don't think anybody's taken this approach to dealing with this issue. So, this is somewhat novel, if you will.
Let's see if there's other questions yet at this point. Looks like, Andrew?
Thank you, sir. I know that in the past I raised this issue and spoke about my reluctance to engage in third-party facilitation. I always felt that this was something that we could do in-house and at no cost to the city. If only we had a public forum with which to discuss these things and a person to referee and oversee the discussion. This has been done in other communities over the course of a 2 to 3 week process, other communities in our area. I don't think this is beyond the abilities of council to do. If we were to pursue any option, which I'm not saying that I support, I'm pretty opposed to an outside facilitation to begin with. I believe that much of the benefit of any action that the city could take to the city is largely going to be financial. I think those gains are going to be pretty marginal, and to make a certain amount of expenditure in order to see a fairly modest financial benefit is a little bit silly, especially when, arguably, many of the stages in the process that the facilitation engages in, such as educational and seeking input from the community, was largely accomplished by the election itself. In the process, getting to that point, I think that we did have many discussions leading up to that that were open to the community, where they could attend if they wanted to, where they could seek education on the issue. I don't think that anything more than the election is going to draw attention to the issue being in the public eye. That being said, if we were to pursue one, I certainly favor the expedited process much more, but I guess it's going to depend on the opinions of the rest of council. So, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Other comments?
Your Honor, this is I know this is an issue that we need to think about and discuss, but I guess in terms of all the priorities that we have going on, this is one of the ones that I kind of put at the lower part of the list based on everything that's on our plate. I think the last time that we had the discussion on medical marijuana, we had the council chamber filled, and was primarily with people that were in support of the city having medical marijuana facilities. I agree with Andrew. I think, I can't recall. Michelle, do you recall what the percentage of voter approval in the city of Monroe was for the recreational marijuana?
I do not.
I'm thinking it was over 60%.
I believe it was high, but I don't remember
Okay.
the exact percentage. And I don't remember the exact percentage of voters that we had out either. Those are interesting numbers, which I can pull.
You know, my personal preference is I don't know if we need to open up a facilitation on this issue since it was already voted on by the public. My area of understanding, where I'd like to get some better information on, is what is the benefits and what are the pros and cons of each one of the options that a community can select. You know, the manufacturing of it, the transport, the operational, the provisioning centers, and what the pros and the cons are relative, if we do opt in, which one or which series or which one are we going to opt in with. To me, that's more of a decision-making process that as a council, we need to have that understanding of what those are, rather than just opening up a community conversation with people to come in and talk that are pro and con against it, because I think that was resolved as part of the voting process already. I'm looking at more technical understanding than I am community facilitation, because that's what the vote already addressed. People were given the opportunity to vote yes or no, and majority of people in the city voted in favor of it. So I'm assuming that people are okay with the recreational marijuana issue, but it's the technical component of what options do we want to proceed with, if any at all. And I think that's what we need to have better education on. That's my point of view.
I'll go through the others and I'll come back. Michelle?
I will piggyback on that. I'm not sure if we have enough state regulations yet to even follow up with something like this. I think we're ahead of the game, which is a good thing. But are we getting too far ahead before the state regulations are in place? That's my only concern. I don't know how everybody else feels about that.
See if there's other comments. If not, Andrew, you had another comment?
Yeah, largely agreeing with Councilman Iquo-Angeli on the point that the missing pieces of information of which we would have to base the decision, at least from where I'm sitting, are going to be market-based, are going to be what do we put, where do we put it, and a lot of what's in the proposal is all community facilitation. So that sort of seems redundant. Just a note, I think even if we do approve, we're not giving up control on the issuances of licenses. We're not giving up control on zoning. It's the issue has been raised in the past that, you know, certain states have moved forward aggressively with policies like these, and there are ways for us to stick our toes in the water and examine the ground before we jump right in. Other states, of course, have issued many licenses. I think unless we issue a lot of licenses, that we're not really at risk for that. So I think there are ways to proceed cautiously.
Other comments? Paula?
If I'd have had my way, it never would have passed, but I don't have my way, so I have to adjust my thinking. And, you know, we don't have a lot of experience in this area, but I have talked to other people from other states and heard some of the mistakes that they made. So I think doing something like this is a step in the right direction so that we learn from the mistakes that other people made. They, you know, there's a lot of pros and cons to what happened in Colorado, and it's not only about money, you know. So I think doing something like this is wise as long as we are all on the same page of what we're looking for.
Kelly?
I guess I'm just trying to understand what is it that we're trying to, what is this facilitator gonna tell us that, like, where we want to, if we remove the moratorium, where the facilities would be allowed, what type of facilities, and that, is that all?
I think, if I may, through the mayor, and part of this is, I view this as an education. Yeah, it's referred to as facilitation, but I think not, you know, having speakers about the pros and cons is important. I will tell you, if you get a petition, at that point in time, somebody else is going to define the terms and conditions by which you may be imposed with these facilities, and you live with them. And that is my concern in the absence of having an educated citizenry as to what the considerations that need to go. You know, I think in some cases, these are important decisions because, you know, you look at what's happened in Colorado, and, you know, there's some folks there that were supportive of it and still support it, but they recognize it's had some effects that they didn't anticipate. And my sense of it is once it's in place, you've got it for decades. And so.
No, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, go.
Your Honor, so even if we get a petition and the voters override our decision, don't we as the council still make the zoning type of decisions and like the land decisions and that?
Good question. I mean, you're still going to have, I'm just looking at the city attorney, you'll still have some input, but you may have a pretty broad number of facilities that can go in. And I mean, if they were to say you're going to have 10 retail operations, okay, where? That's my concern. If you're more proactive on it, you can have an informed citizenry participate in that. And even if it passes, at least there has been an education process. If a petition was to pass, at least there has been some education process that is accompanied this. And that's, I think, at the end of the day, the best that you can do is to try and have that.
So I don't know really how I feel about it at this time, because I do agree with Andrew that it seems a bit redundant after we already had the elections. I'd be interested in knowing how the petition, if it passes, how much control the petition has as opposed to how much control the council and administration has, as far as where, I mean, can't we just, if we decided to lift the moratorium, can't we just say it's only allowed in this area, it's not allowed next to a school, next to a church, or does the state set those standards? Or does the petitioner set the standard?
Well, I don't know what the petition would look like. And that's, you know, and in
Be
the
based on
absence
how
of
it
those
was
type
written.
of issues being discussed, you know, my worry is that you're dependent on the information that's provided there with the petition.
John?
Well, I think the other part of the issue is that some communities are trying to address what facilities they want and where they want them located and how they're going to issue their licenses. But they're doing that in a void because the state hasn't come out with the administrative guidelines yet. And those may be changed. There was just an article in the paper today where one of the state's advisory commissions said that they recommended for law enforcement purposes not to use the THC blood test because it's not reliable, and to go back to the old-fashioned sobriety test that the police officer would give out in the road. So this thing is still, there's a lot of gray areas yet because there's no firm administrative guidelines. But I guess where I'm cycling back. People voted for this. That's already been decided. I think the issue where I would like is the educational part of it in terms of trying to understand what the impacts are associated with each of the different types of facilities. My other concern is that we're a border county with Ohio, and when this does go into effect, and it is in effect now, I can see that we're going to, there's going to be more activity in the county, the border counties along the Michigan and Ohio and Indiana line are going to see people coming into the state in order to purchase medical or recreational marijuana, possibly stay for a weekend, that type of thing, which has an impact on law enforcement, and it comes at our expense because we're the ones that have to fund that. So I'd like to see more education on the various facilities and what the potential impacts are before we decide on which ones we think we're going to opt in with. Because I think that's the reason why we opted out, was because there was no guidelines established by the state yet for us to even review on which type of facilities we wanted.
So I guess I'll weigh in. So I look at the proposal here, and I think it's a lot about facilitating open houses and people coming. We've been through that process, and I think if it's, you don't know what you're going to get if that's it. Are they really here to learn, as the councilmen have said, you know, education and understanding the technical, and this is what could be and where it could be placed? Or are they coming just to, you know, rally a cause for or a cause against? And as everybody said here, that's been decided already. But unfortunately, you know, I go back to that language. If anybody could tell me what that entire language meant in relation to what we're facing now, I think people would think differently. We're finding, you know, whether more support or less, I don't know. But I think that there's challenges that have already come up, and John just mentioned the one that, well, we're not going to use that system. The commission's not going to make that decision. Law enforcement will have to figure that out as far as, you know, if there's impacts regarding use and driving. So it's passed, and I think we need to have something in place. And I think that internally, whether that's a communications plan, whether that's it as a start, and that we need to get the information, I think, in council to make a decision. Are we going to venture into any one of the options that are available? And the facilitation, I think, is just going to start from a line that's not going to end, and we'll be right back where we started and have to make a decision. I'm not sure what we'll get, but I do think that we have to be prepared. I know it's come up before, and I know we don't really have an answer probably now, but you think about the use of where that would be and what facility, as it's already been said. But do we have some internal items regarding whether it's through planning, the master plan, and locations that we start to identify if there was items that were allowed, where would they be? Where would they be placed? So I think about the petition. I don't know if there'll even be a petition, but if there is, it could be so generic or so broad that we don't know what we have at the end. And I think that's why we should have something in place in preparation. But are we ahead of that too far? Is it, as the councilwoman said, and others, do we have to wait for the state? I don't think, if we wait to the end of the year, that's going to be too late. We could find out in an upcoming election if somebody pulls a petition. And if we have that, and of course the clerk will get that information, we'll have to start moving forward with at least some, not to counter somebody's right to have a petition. That's not what it is. But we need to be prepared, not just as a council, but for the residents, and have that input. I think an input session of some fashion is important, but it's not to rally for or against. That's been decided. It's what will come down to as a vote here if there is a petition. What, not do you want to think it's recreational marijuana for you statewide, but you as now a community of Monroe, what's acceptable to you? And I think that'll be a different decision for some people maybe. So I don't have an answer on the fact. I think this facility, long-term, I think is the comprehensive, I think is just asking for more that isn't going to get us closer. If it was expedited, I think it's still phases that I'm not sure what we're going to, that's why I like to see what some examples, if they have done it. If they haven't done it, then should we be the first to venture down this area as well? I think it is the technical information. I think it is education. I think we can probably provide a lot of that information. That's kind of my start point. Okay. Unless there's other comments.
Much to what you said, Mayor, is I think that the more important and valuable information has to do with some of the technical knowledge, where to place things, how is it going to affect certain legal issues, will impaired driving increase because of it, other things like that. But that's not what's in the current proposal. So,
and we do know the transportation component of what was passed in that proposal, you cannot regulate. If it's permissible in a location next to a municipality township and they're coming through another community, no matter who it is, you can't regulate the transportation element of that. Mm-hmm. It's just going to occur. So it's really, and I think maybe that's sort of start point is, at a next session is what can we develop here and present from staff to present to the council of going through those. Because if everybody can remember what those were, then I'm we should say them, but I'm even hesitant to think I'm gonna remember all what was in there. So I think that's a start point in the next meeting to say, here's what's permissible under what was passed on recreational use as far as not what's permissible, what action a city or a township could take in starting, and what those definitions are, knowing that the rules aren't set yet. I think that's at least a start point in the community. Hopefully we'll be listening and we'll understand better, because I think that's critically important. So I don't know if that helps, Mr. Pastor, but we'll move forward.
In the interest of time, I know
Yep.
we got to get rolling here.
Yep, sure.
One other item I wanted to talk about, and that was you have an item with Planner 1 position. I had mentioned last week at the budget meeting, I would have liked to have put some money in for a lobbyist. Well, one of the things that we're looking at doing is not backfilling that vacant position at this point in time. And what I would recommend is that we earmark roughly $40,000 for a lobbyist related to some of the grant projects that we were looking at, but also put some funding in for a contract grant writer. And then I would use the remaining for the community development departments, or wage and salary adjustments and some contract services. So I would recommend we just leave it all in the community development budget at this point, with the understanding. And you see the transition plan, a lot of the things that the previous incumbent had done, we've kind of moved some of it around internally and externally as well. And other folks have picked up bits and pieces with it. So, but that would be my recommendation. We don't have to do anything right now. Our recommendation, leave it in the budget. But if we were to talk further about a lobbyist position or even a contract writer, it's going to have to come before your council anyways for approval, and we would just seek a budget amendment when that time comes. So,
It's fine.
So as I understand, Mr. Pastor, there, at least for a budget, which is coming up this month to be finalized, it's holding the funding that was intended for that position, shifted to community development, and then coming back with what that's going to look like with more time.
yep, probably
Okay.
after the first of the fiscal year.
Okay.
Yep.
So on your list of items on the transition plan, I know this because has come up, and we had a former staff person that had kind of oversight on the U.S. Census obligations that we'll have. If you'd put that on the list as well.
That is the one item on there I was going to add to it, and
Yeah.
forgot what the sixth one, and that was it. So.
Yeah. Good. I received another email today,
Yes,
actually.
okay.
So, and I know there's time issues with that, and I'll make comments at the council meeting regarding that, because there's also opportunity for residents, also opportunity for those to be employed to assist with that, because it's critically important. But I'll save that for the council meeting. Other items, Mr. Pastu?
No, that's it for the
So
work
we'll see
session.
if there's items or any inquiries the council has leading into the meeting for tonight. I don't see any this way. Any other comments or questions for administration right now, Mr. Pastu, in the work session? Very well. If there's no other action, we'll be adjourned. Thank you. So for those that are here, the next will be the city council meeting, which comes up at 7:30.